What happens when centuries of colonial arrogance meets the unyielding force of African dignity? You're about to witness the most epic takedown in modern diplomatic history, a moment that sent shockwaves across every boardroom in Europe and inspired millions across Africa. A wealthy Belgian businessman steps off his private jet in Burkina Faso, contracts worth hundreds of millions in his briefcase, absolutely certain he's about to close the easiest deal of his career. He has no idea he's walking into a trap that will destroy his reputation forever and become a masterclass in how real leadership defends its people. The private jet's engines whined to a stop on the tarmac of Ouagadougou International Airport, its polished chrome reflecting the relentless West African sun. Inside the leather-appointed cabin, Marcus Beaumont straightened his Hermes tie with the satisfaction of a predator approaching wounded prey. The French-Belgian industrialist had built his mining empire across Africa's mineral-rich landscapes, yet his knowledge of the continent extended no deeper than geological surveys and profit margins. His Rolex caught the light as he gathered documents that would, he believed, secure Burkina Faso's gold reserves for the next quarter-century. The contracts in his Italian leather briefcase represented the culmination of months of preparation, legal frameworks designed to extract maximum wealth while providing minimum compensation, dressed in the language of development and partnership. "Another primitive capital," Marcus muttered to his assistant, gazing through the aircraft window at Ouagadougou's sprawling cityscape. The comment carried the casual racism of a man who had never bothered to learn that this primitive capital was once part of the great mossy kingdoms, civilizations that had thrived when his ancestors were subsistence farmers in medieval Europe. But here's what Marcus didn't know, and this is where our story gets interesting. The young military leader waiting to meet him wasn't just another African politician desperate for foreign investment. Captain Ibrahim Traoré represented something far more dangerous to men like Marcus. A new generation of African leaders who had studied not just economics and military strategy, but history, the real history of how foreign partnerships had systematically impoverished their continent for centuries. The motorcade from the airport cut through streets pulsing with life that Marcus couldn't see beyond his preconceptions. Women in brilliant fabrics moved with the confident grace of people who belonged to this land, their businesses thriving despite, not because of, foreign intervention. Young entrepreneurs navigated traffic on motorcycles, their phones connecting them to global markets that no longer required European middlemen. Children in crisp school uniforms laughed near fountains built not by foreign aid, but by their own government's commitment to education and infrastructure. Marcus noticed none of this vitality. His attention remained fixed on his phone as he finalized what he considered generous terms, a €300 million investment that would allow his consortium to extract an estimated $14 billion in gold over 25 years. The mathematics of exploitation had never seemed more favorable. At the Hotel Azalai, Marcus's entourage created an instant bubble of privilege in the modest but dignified lobby. His expensive luggage piled high while he demanded upgrades in French, tinged with the condescension of someone accustomed to African deference. The local staff maintained their professionalism despite his dismissive gestures, their composure masking what they really thought of this performance. "I need everything perfect for tomorrow's meeting," Marcus announced loudly, ensuring everyone understood his importance. His eyes held that familiar assumption, that money could buy anything here, that these people would be grateful for whatever crumbs he offered. But while Marcus sipped whiskey in the hotel bar, something was happening across Burkina Faso that would have terrified him if he'd understood its significance. President Ibrahim Traoré was visiting rural mining cooperatives, his military fatigues dusty from unpaved roads, his notebook filled with detailed conversations with local miners about fair wages, environmental protection, and community ownership of resources. This wasn't a photo opportunity. It was research. The young president was building a comprehensive understanding of how foreign mining contracts had impacted communities, gathering ammunition for a confrontation he knew was coming. The evening news flickered on the hotel bar television, showing Traoré speaking with farmers about food sovereignty and economic independence. Marcus glanced at the screen with barely concealed disdain. "They always cave eventually," he whispered to his assistant, ordering another whiskey. "Money talks louder than nationalism." What Marcus couldn't see was the revolution happening in plain sight. Burkina Faso's transformation under Traoré wasn't just political, it was psychological. A generation that had grown up hearing stories of Thomas Sankara's vision was now watching that vision implemented by leaders who understood both its moral power and its practical applications. The stage was set for more than just a business meeting. This was going to be a collision between two worldviews: the dying gasps of colonial mentality and the rising force of African self-determination. And Marcus Beaumont, with his racist assumptions and exploitative contracts, was about to become the unwitting catalyst for one of the most powerful displays of dignity the world had ever witnessed. The National Palace Conference Hall buzzed with an energy that should have warned Marcus something was different. Built during Thomas Sankara's revolutionary era, the chamber's walls displayed portraits of Burkina Faso's heroes alongside maps showing the country's mineral wealth that had enriched everyone except the Burkinabé people themselves. Marcus entered with theatrical confidence, his tailored Armani suit a stark contrast to the modest attire of local officials. He distributed business cards like a colonial administrator offering trinkets, his handshake calculated to convey both power and benevolence. Young government advisors watched with expressions that Marcus misread as nervous anticipation. In reality, these were economists and engineers educated at the world's finest institutions, and they were studying him like specimens under a microscope. The air conditioning hummed softly, but the atmosphere crackled with tension Marcus couldn't identify. He assumed it was the usual anxiety of poor nations meeting wealthy investors. He had no idea he was walking into the most sophisticated economic ambush in modern African history. Then Ibrahim Traoré arrived, and everything changed. The president entered without fanfare, his military boots echoing against marble floors as conversations naturally paused. His presence didn't demand attention through ostentation. It commanded respect through an almost tangible sense of purpose. He wore simple fatigues, dusty from morning visits to gold-panning cooperatives, but his bearing carried the authority of someone comfortable with both power and responsibility. When Traoré's eyes swept the room, absorbing every detail and dynamic, his gaze landed on Marcus with an assessment that made the businessman unexpectedly uncomfortable. There was no hostility in that look, something far more unsettling. It was the clinical evaluation of someone who already knew exactly what Marcus represented and had prepared accordingly. Here's where the psychological warfare began, though Marcus didn't recognize it. Traoré moved first to greet local leaders, listening intently to a farmer's concerns about land rights, engaging in detailed discussion about mineral royalties with community representatives. Marcus found himself deliberately made to wait, not rudely but systematically, as the president prioritized his own people over the foreign visitor. The forum began with traditional greetings in Moray before switching to French, but these weren't the conversations Marcus expected. There was no desperate plea for foreign investment, no grateful acceptance of any terms offered. Instead, speakers discussed food sovereignty, local manufacturing, and breaking cycles of dependency. The language itself was a declaration. We are not begging for help. We are building partnerships with equals. When Marcus was finally invited to present, he approached the podium with rehearsed humility that barely concealed his arrogance. His PowerPoint displayed glossy images of mines and processing plants, carefully selected statistics about job creation that told less than half the story. He spoke of partnership and development, while his contract terms, sitting in folders before each participant, revealed the brutal reality of modern colonialism. "Gentlemen," Marcus concluded with practiced warmth dripping with condescension. This is your opportunity to join the global economy on terms that benefit everyone. The room fell silent. Not the silence of submission, but the quiet before a storm that would reshape everything Marcus thought he knew about Africa. Ibrahim Traoré set down his pen, rose slowly from his seat, and what happened next would be studied in economics classrooms and political science departments for generations. But first, Marcus made it worse. So much worse. "Mr. President," he began with false deference, "your country sits on gold worth billions, yet your people remain underdeveloped." The word hung in the air like a slap, carrying centuries of colonial arrogance in its 4 syllables. He clicked to another slide showing comparative GDP figures designed to emphasize Burkina Faso's position as weakness rather than potential. "My consortium is prepared to invest $300 million immediately, creating jobs and bringing expertise you currently lack." His smile widened as he distributed the bound contracts, their fine print concealing 90% profit shares for foreign companies and environmental standards so lax they would be illegal in any European nation. Young advisors bristled visibly, but Marcus remained oblivious to the offense he was causing. "Of course, we'll need certain guarantees," he continued, his tone growing more comfortable with perceived control. "Tax exemptions for 25 years, unlimited repatriation of profits, and priority access to mineral deposits in the Eastern Territories." He gestured dismissively toward the window, as if the land and its people were mere commodities awaiting proper management. "Your previous leaders understood these necessary arrangements. Frankly, without foreign expertise, these resources remain worthless in the ground." The phrase "foreign expertise" dripped with unspoken suggestion that Africans lacked capacity for their own development. Ministers' jaws tightened with restrained anger that Marcus interpreted as acceptance, blind to the revolutionary fire burning behind their composed expressions. Then came the statement that sealed his doom, spoken with wine-loosened arrogance during what he thought was casual conversation. "Between us, gentlemen, Africa needs guidance. Always has, always will," Marcus said, leaning back with shocking casualness. "Your children might thank us someday when they're not living in—" He paused theatrically. "Such rustic conditions." His laugh echoed awkwardly in the silent chamber, a sound from another era that should have died with colonialism. The racism wasn't subtle or coded. It was naked, presumptuous, delivered as if among friends who shared his world view. A young female minister's hand trembled as she gripped her pen, decades of education and patriotism colliding with the insult before her. Ibrahim Traoré's face remained a mask of composure, but those who knew him recognized the steel forming behind his eyes. The president's fingers drummed once against the table, a signal his team recognized immediately. The time for polite tolerance had ended, and Marcus Beaumont was about to receive an education more valuable than any his money could buy. What happened next changed everything. Ibrahim Traoré remained seated, his posture relaxed, yet alert like a seasoned soldier assessing terrain before engagement. His silence stretched longer than comfortable, each second adding weight to the atmosphere like gathering thunderclouds. Marcus mistook this quietness for calculation of acceptance, perhaps negotiation of slightly better terms. But those who understood Burkina Faso's history recognized something else entirely: the calm before a storm of dignity that would reshape how Africa engaged with the world. Traoré picked up Marcus's contract with deliberate slowness. His calloused hands, unusual for a head of state, turning pages with careful attention. These were hands that had held weapons in defense of his nation, that had worked alongside farmers and miners. Each clause received his scrutiny: the 25-year tax exemptions, the unlimited profit repatriation, the environmental clauses so weak they were essentially non-existent. His jaw tightened imperceptibly at the section granting foreign companies legal immunity from local prosecution for operational incidents. The document represented everything Thomas Sankara had fought against, everything the Burkina Faso Revolution had rejected, the idea that African resources existed primarily for foreign enrichment. The president set the contract down gently, as one might handle contaminated material, and interlaced his fingers on the table. His gaze lifted to meet Marcus's eyes with an intensity that finally penetrated the businessman's bubble of superiority. "Mr. Beaumont," Traoré began, his voice calm yet carrying the weight of ancestral memory across the chamber's sudden stillness. "You speak of development as if we are children waiting for instruction, as if this land bore no civilization before European ships arrived." The words were measured, each syllable precisely placed like a master craftsman setting stones in a foundation meant to last centuries. "Let me remind you of Thomas Sankara, who stood where I stand now, who told the world that Africa's debt was paid in blood and exploitation." The mention of Sankara's name electrified the room. Ministers sat taller, young advisers nodded with reverence for their eternal hero, and Marcus shifted uncomfortably as his corporate training proved inadequate for leaders who quoted revolutionaries instead of quarterly earnings. He said, "We must produce what we consume and consume what we produce. A simple truth your contract violates in every clause. Burkina Faso means land of upright people, Mr. Beaumont, and that name was earned through sacrifice, not given by foreign approval." The president's eyes held Marcus's gaze with unwavering intensity, forcing the businessman to confront a dignity he had never acknowledged. When Sankara was assassinated in 1987, they killed a man, but not an idea, not a vision of African self-determination. His hand gestured toward the portraits on the walls, revolutionaries, freedom fighters, ordinary citizens who had died defending sovereignty. Every child in this nation learns that true development comes from within, that our resources belong first to our people. But Traoré was just getting started. The history lesson was about to become an economics masterclass that would expose Marcus's proposal for what it truly was. "You arrive here speaking of guidance and expertise as if colonialism never ended, merely changed its costume from military uniforms to business suits." The president's voice remained steady, but steel reinforced every word, cutting through decades of diplomatic euphemisms. "Your grandfathers told our grandfathers the same stories, that exploitation was partnership, that theft was investment, that our subjugation was civilization." A young minister openly smiled now, pride radiating from her face as her president articulated what generations had felt but been forced to swallow. "We built empires here, Ghana, Mali, Songhai, when Europe was emerging from its dark ages. Yet you speak as if history began with your arrival." Marcus's face reddened, whether from anger or shame unclear, but his confident posture had begun to crumble noticeably. Then came the devastating economic analysis that would be quoted in business schools worldwide. "Let's discuss numbers, since you clearly believe Africans can't count," Traoré said, his tone sharpening as he opened his own folder of documents prepared by Burkina Faso's economists. "Your $300 million investment sounds generous until we examine what you plan to extract from our soil." Numbers appeared on the projector screen behind him, figures that would haunt Marcus for the rest of his career. Conservative estimates show $14 billion in gold reserves in the territories you want, and your contract grants you 90% of profits. The mathematics were devastating. Marcus's consortium would extract 47 dealers for every euro Burkina Faso received. Ministers nodded as their president dismantled the illusion of generosity with cold, irrefutable facts. Marcus's assistant frantically checked her own calculations, realizing with horror that local experts had thoroughly analyzed their scheme and found it wanting. Your job creation promise of 5,000 positions sounds impressive until we calculate the cost, Traoré continued, his finger tracing lines in the contract. For each job paying $200 monthly, your companies will extract an average of $35,000 in resources monthly. The ratio was obscene when laid bare before witnesses who would carry this truth beyond the conference hall's walls. Meanwhile, your environmental clauses allow pollution levels that would be illegal in Belgium, France, or any nation where your children drink the water. His words carried the weight of communities already suffering from unregulated mining, rivers poisoned by foreign operations that faced no accountability. The economic reality check was complete. Marcus's offer wasn't investment, it was sophisticated theft dressed in development rhetoric, and everyone in the room now understood exactly how the con worked. But Traoré wasn't finished. He was about to deliver the knockout blow that would end Marcus's career and inspire a continent. You mentioned expertise repeatedly, as if our engineers haven't studied at the world's finest institutions, as if our geologists don't understand our own land. The president's voice carried an edge of righteous anger now, controlled but unmistakable to everyone present. We have 17 mining engineers with advanced degrees, 34 geologists trained internationally, and hundreds of skilled workers you dismiss as inadequate. He gestured toward his team, each member representing years of education and dedication to national development. What you call expertise, Mr. Beaumont, we call exploitation, the knowledge of how to extract maximum wealth while leaving minimum benefit. The room erupted in spontaneous applause, unable to contain their pride in this moment of collective affirmation. Marcus sat frozen as his entire worldview crumbled under the weight of articulate, devastating truth. Your contract requires we provide infrastructure, roads, electricity, water to your mining sites at our expense while you pay nothing in taxes. Traoré's laugh was bitter, conveying generations of such one-sided arrangements. Essentially, Burkina Faso finances your profit-making while assuming all risks and receiving scraps from our own resources. The president closed the folder with finality, the sound sharp in the silent chamber. This isn't investment, Mr. Beaumont. It's the same colonial extraction our ancestors died fighting, wrapped in PowerPoint presentations and corporate language. What happened next would be remembered as the moment Africa said, "Enough," to centuries of exploitation. So here is Burkina Faso's answer to your generous proposition, Traoré declared, rising from his seat with the commanding presence of a general addressing his troops. We reject your contract, your condescension, and your racist assumptions about African capacity and dignity. His voice resonated through the chamber with a clarity that would echo across continents through viral videos and news broadcasts. We will develop our resources ourselves, with partners who respect sovereignty, not predators disguised as saviors. Marcus's face drained of color as the magnitude of this public rejection crashed over him. Ministers erupted in sustained applause, unable to contain their pride in this moment of historical significance. You arrive here speaking of what we lack, but let me tell you what Burkina Faso possesses in abundance, the president continued, his finger pointing directly at the stunned businessman. We have dignity that cannot be purchased, intelligence that refuses to be insulted, and courage to reject arrangements that betray our children's future. Each phrase built upon the last, creating a rhetorical fortress against the siege of neo-colonial economics. Your grandfather's generation told our grandfathers they were civilizing us while stealing everything. Your father's generation called it development while the theft continued. Traoré's voice grew stronger, channeling the spirits of Sankara, Lumumba, and countless unnamed ancestors who had resisted subjugation. Now, you arrive with the same theft rebranded as investment, expecting us to smile and sign away our sovereignty. The historical continuity of exploitation stood exposed, its mechanisms laid bare for all to witness and reject. Africa is not your inheritance, Mr. Beaumont. It is ours, bought with the blood of those who refused to bow. The president's military background emerged in his bearing, shoulders square, spine straight, eyes blazing with conviction that inspired everyone present. Every resource in our soil, every mineral beneath our feet, belongs first to Burkina Faso's people, not to foreign shareholders in Brussels or Paris. His declaration reverberated with the philosophy that had driven Burkina Faso's revolution, that true independence meant economic sovereignty, not just flags and anthems. We would rather develop slowly with dignity than quickly on our knees, rather partner with those who respect us than enrich those who despise us. Young people watching via live stream erupted in celebration across Ouagadougou, their phones capturing a leader speaking truths they had always felt but never heard articulated with such power. The final blow was delivered with surgical precision. Take your contract back to Belgium, Mr. Beaumont, and understand that Africa's era of grateful submission has ended. Traoré's conclusion carried finality that left no room for negotiation or appeal. Tell your consortium that Burkina Faso chooses partnership with dignity over profit with humiliation, and any future engagement requires genuine respect, fair terms, and recognition of our equality. The president's hand swept dismissively toward the door, a gesture of such authority that even Marcus's security detail seemed ready to escort him out. History will remember this moment, not as your generosity rejected, but as Africa's self-respect affirmed, as one more nail in the coffin of attitudes that should have died with colonialism. The chamber erupted in thunderous applause that shook the walls, a cathartic release of centuries of suppressed response to racist condescension. Marcus Beaumont sat devastated. Finally understanding, he had just been schooled by the very people he had presumed to educate. The aftermath was immediate and global. Within hours, video clips of Traoré's speech were trending worldwide, translated into dozens of languages and shared millions of times. African youth from Cairo to Cape Town watched repeatedly, memorizing phrases that articulated their own experiences with condescension and exploitation. Marcus's humiliation became complete as his phone buzzed incessantly with messages he couldn't bring himself to read. His corporate headquarters fielded calls from journalists, investors, and board members demanding explanations for the public relations disaster. Partners who had relied on his African expertise distanced themselves, recognizing association with him as toxic to their interests. But the real victory wasn't Marcus's defeat. It was Africa's awakening. Across the continent, leaders felt pressure from populations demanding similar backbone in international negotiations. Youth movements organized forums on economic independence, using the Ouagadougou confrontation as their foundational case study. International corporations adjusted their approaches, recognizing that the old playbook of exploitation disguised as partnership would no longer work without challenge. Some companies genuinely reformed, understanding that sustainable profit required respecting host nations. Others simply became more sophisticated in their manipulation. But the conversation had shifted irreversibly. African leaders now had a template for resistance, and populations had witnessed what principled leadership looked like in action. Within Burkina Faso, the impact was transformative. Street vendors sold T-shirts emblazoned with Traoré's most powerful quotes. Schools organized assemblies where students discussed the confrontation. Young entrepreneurs felt emboldened to reject exploitative partnerships, citing their president's example. The national mood shifted palpably. A collective straightening of spines, a refusal to bow that permeated every sector. Burkina Faso's revolution, born in Sankara's vision, found renewed energy in Traoré's unwavering defense of African dignity. Marcus Beaumont had come to Burkina Faso expecting submission, but instead catalyzed a movement. His racism and arrogance became the fuel for Africa's renewed commitment to sovereignty. proving that sometimes the greatest teachers are those who demonstrate exactly what to reject. The confrontation between Ibrahim Traoré and Marcus Beaumont proved that Africa's era of silent acceptance has ended. A new generation refuses exploitation disguised as partnership, and they're armed with education, dignity, and the unshakable conviction that their continent's resources belong to its people. The ghost of Thomas Sankara seemed to smile from history's pages, his vision of dignity and self-determination alive in every word Traoré spoke. The revolution continues, one rejected contract at a time. One dignified response to racism at a time, one generation at a time. This was more than a business meeting. It was a declaration that Africa's future will be written by Africans, for Africans, with the full power of education, dignity, and uncompromising self-respect leading the way.